And it sits deep in the depths of who we are. And all we need to do to grasp that wisdom is to be still, to be quiet. It is said often that stillness is the presence of God. Silence is the language of God. And if we could be still and we could be quiet, we will find that our own intuition, our own Christ presence, Buddha nature, will well up from the depths of who we are and make manifest in our world if we'll just be quiet and still and patient. And it comes forward.
Reverend Michael, thank you and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be with you again.
Last time I seen you, I remember we were at the Carlos Santana concert. One of the last times.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. And you know I'm still talking about it.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me. That was wonderful.
Yeah, I wanted to have you talk about the Unity movement, Unity Church, or Unity Spiritual Center. What made you become a Unity Reverend minister? A lot of my friends and my audience, my family, maybe not have heard of Unity Church or the Unity movement, and I find it very attractive, and I love the teachings of the Unity movement.
Well, thank you for clarifying, because it's really not a religion, or it's more about a movement, as you pointed out. It's a concept that was brought up by Charles and Myrtle Fillmore back around the turn of the last century. And the idea was not to begin a new segment or a new tradition, but to embellish and make more meaningful the religious beliefs that you already have. So this was originally not designed to take the place of whatever religious path or spiritual path that you were on, but just to make it more fulfilling, more helpful to practical living spirituality. And that was something that very much attracted me, because in the religion that I grew up in, I found that there were very hard and fast dogmatic ways of thinking. And I was very rebellious along those lines. I did not want to connect in those ways. I didn't like the way it made me feel judged, or made me feel that I wasn't good enough. And I take responsibility for some of those feelings as I became an adult, but I certainly carried some of those things over from my childhood. Unity became something that came to me after I found sobriety. And once I did, I knew that there had to be more. In 12-step circles, we talk about a power greater than ourselves. And for me, I wanted to find out where that power lied so that I could tap into it. And I found out through a lot of research and finding the truth for me, that I had to go inside to find the truth that made sense to me. I couldn't find it in all the books that I read, and all of the lectures that I've heard, and all the preachings that I've heard preached. I had to find something that worked for me. And Unity offered that. It offered me a pretty much of a free rein, without being judgmental, as to what my conception of God is. Now, that's not to say there aren't any core beliefs in the Unity movement, but they're all up for edification. They're all up for transparency. And we can get into talking more about that. But to answer your question, I was searching for something more than what was being offered by the 12-step program that I had found myself in the midst of. And I was about 10 years into sobriety, and I felt empty. I felt like there must be more to it than what was being offered in the circles that I was running. And a friend of mine said, you ought to check out this unity movement. There's a place where they gather not too far from where you live. Why don't you go there one Sunday and check it out? And so I did. I went to the minister there and I said, look, if you're going to tell me that all Buddhists are going to hell, we can end this conversation here, because I had really been a little bit defiant by that time about what God as a loving being or as a loving entity or as love itself would not allow any of his children or her children or its children to be judged in such a harsh manner. And we took about an hour and a half of a half-hour meeting that I had set up. It just went on and on. And I decided that I would go and check his out and his teachings or his ministry, and it worked for me. And I started going, and I was being fed, and I felt that I had reached a place that was going to nurture my spirituality, and still does today. So once I got into it and started following the teachings, and I saw them working in my life, I began to study in a deeper level and decided to go to seminary, which I did for 2 years of graduate work, and became a licensed and ordained unity minister. And that's what I'm doing today with what we call Unity Awakening Ways, which is a subset ministry that my wife, Reverend Meghan, and I began in a way to show people that there are many ways to find the Spirit of God in your life. And that's why we called it Unity Awakening Ways, plural. And that's what we connect with. So we too have a little meeting online every Wednesday. So I'm glad to see that you're doing that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I usually don't talk about this, and I haven't told many people, but when I had my awakening in 2009, I was suffering from alcoholism, and I love what the spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle says: at the beginning of all addiction there is pain, and at the end of all addiction there is pain. And I had so much pain it woke me up, and I woke up in a new state of consciousness. But I felt guided by this being. It's weird. I felt guided, and I later come to find out that it was a man um, by named Paramahansa Yogananda, who I never heard of. I mean, I was just from the streets, never raised in religion, and I felt his presence always trying to talk to me. It's weird. And one day I found out about Unity Church. So I went in Torrance, California, and I went to a Unity Church by myself, and I seen the 12 powers, and that's pretty cool, the 12 steps. And in the background it said, "Be still and know I am God," and I love that saying. And there was a guest reverend speaking from San Diego, I remember, and he mentioned Paramahansa Yogananda. And I'm like, everywhere I went at that very beginning of my awakening, I felt guided by this guy, like he was trying to speak to me and guide me, like a guide for my first 3 years, if that makes any sense. So everywhere I'd go, just going to Unity for my first time, and he talked about Paramahansa Yogananda, and he said, anytime Yogananda would tell his disciples, if they couldn't find a self-realization fellowship, go to a Unity church. I'm like, wow. So I really love the inclusiveness of Unity Church. And speaking of that, you brought up hell, worried about Buddhists going to hell. What does Unity teach about heaven and hell?
Well, for most of the cliche items like that, heaven and hell, we see it not from an earthly plane, but from more of an etherical plane. So that heaven is a an experience of a joyful life. Heaven is more of a state of mind than it is a place to be. And therefore, hell is the same. It's a place that we find ourselves in when we're maybe in the throes of a very heavy and deep depression, or maybe we're in the midst of our addictions, or maybe we're just in a sad place of our life and it feels like hell. And therefore, we say, what would it be like if it was like this all the time? Well, part of me feels that a lot of the forerunners to the spirituality that we have today wanted to control the people under their administration. And they used the concept of hell to frighten people into doing what they wanted them to do. And therefore, you'll see if you study any Roman history, you'll even the Greek history, a lot of the people who wanted to control their people and couldn't do it physically or wanted an easier way to do it, they did it mentally. They would tell people certain things that may or may not be true, but if it scared them into doing what you wanted them to do, even if they threatened them with everlasting punishment and pain and heartbreak, they would use it. And so what we're finding out today is that maybe hell isn't a place you go to after you die if you've been quote unquote bad. But maybe hell is a state of mind where you really are in a position of suffering. You know, some of the people that you've mentioned, Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote the autobiography of a yogi, which was the book that came out very, very early in my experience of searching for spirituality back in the 60s. Really talked to us about pain being inevitable, but suffering being optional. We're all going to feel pain in our lives. We're all going to experience loss. We're all going to have some grief that we have to deal with. However, suffering is when we become that pain, when we become that suffering, when we identify so deeply with pain and suffering that it feels like we're in the midst of hell. By the same token, if we take a look at heaven, we can see that when you do things that are helpful to others, when you find yourself in service to others, there is an innate joy that follows. And it follows simply because you did what we might call the right thing, or you did something helpful, or you spread some joy to others in your life, and you feel that connection to this power that's greater than you, and it's that universal presence, that consciousness of being in the midst of joy. I think it was Teilhard de Chardin who said that joy is the undeniable evidence of the presence of God.
I love that. I know you mentioned Yogananda as well as I did, and what was interesting about Yogananda is he felt that the light is dim in Christianity, so he wanted to come to America and help bring back some of the original teachings of Jesus. That's what he believed. And the interesting part about Yogananda is he talked about, like, his teachings were about finding the Christ within you. He says that's the second coming of Christ, which I thought it was interesting. And then he died in 1952-ish, in the early 1950s. But then we find the Gnostic Gospels in 45 or 48? I forget. Somewhere in between 1945 or 48, we found the Gnostic Gospels, the Nag Hammadi Library. And what he
Yes.
was saying pretty much is confirmed in those Gnostic texts. So I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. 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 I agree. The Gospel of Thomas
Yeah.
and many of the others that we have seen, but also we have to remember that before any of those things were written down on papyrus or paper or leather scrolls, they were carried down word of mouth and they were told in stories. So if I were to tell you that there was a guy out there who did some really good stuff and helped a lot of people and was very much of service in his life, that would say something about a good man. But if I were to tell you that there was someone out there that was faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, you would know exactly who I was talking about. And that's how they built up the images of these great saints by laying with them or before them the idea that they are more than human. And it isn't necessarily so, but their service and their love and their inspiration to others was heavenly, and therefore they were bestowed upon them this great honor of being great teachers or saints. Some of that, the miracles that they supposedly um, were part of, were never um, they were never really confined to themselves. They always gave credit to this power that lives in the consciousness of each of us. So God is in all of us, as they say, and we're all in the presence of that consciousness all the time.
You know, Ramakrishna says, God is in all of us, but all of us are not in God, and that's where we suffer. And I love that.
Mm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
the Charles Fillmore talked about the God man and the God mind and the perfect ideal of man, and he breaks down the different religions of like Krishna in Hinduism, or Buddha in Buddhism, and Christ in Christianity. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad in Islam, you know, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I think if we can truly understand the universal truth and the same principles that are carried in every religion, maybe we can reduce the discrimination and division, or we're the right and you're wrong mentality, and just be more loving and kind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that when we come to the realization that there's only one of us here, that there's a unification that um, that spreads throughout the entirety of mankind. We are alike in so many ways, and yet we have different approaches, and therefore none of these religious factions have to be wrong in order to be okay to connect with. They can all be considered one way of entering the kingdom of heaven or climbing the mountain of consciousness, if we'll just allow ourselves to say, I see what you see, but from a different angle. One very wise man said to me one time, one man looked out the window and saw the moon. Another man looked out the window and saw the stars. Which man was right? Well, it depends on what window you're looking out. And so if you're looking out the window and you were brought up in China, you might be looking through the lens of Lao Tzu or Confucius. If you were born in India, you would be looking at the lens through Krishna. The Buddhists and the Hindus might be seeing things differently, but maybe it's really the same sky that we're looking at. We're just not looking at it from all positions at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah, the Zen master who recently passed away a few years ago, moved on, said, "Until there is peace within the religions, there cannot be peace within the world, and I love that. So that's one of the main reasons I wanted to bring you on, because I love what you guys teach, and the compassion and understanding you guys provide, and help water the seeds of unity within the world. That's how I felt every time I would go to a unity church. I really enjoyed the inclusiveness, and I think that's powerful.
Mm.
Um, Speaking of that, what does Unity Church believe about other religions, and what is the core belief of Unity's conception of God or understanding of God?
So I wish that I could verbalize it and cover everything for all Unity churches and ministers, but we are very autonomous. So you might not get the same message in one Unity church depending on who's giving the message that particular day. But the thing that we seem to agree upon is that there is most likely only one presence or one power. And this presence or this power is in my life and in the life of everyone else. And you talked about it just slightly earlier when you say this God man, this essence of Christ consciousness, the Buddha nature, the Atman that lives in all of us, right? Is this presence and this power. And if we can let our egos step aside and allow our divine self to come forward, this divine self is the self that we connect with when we feel peace, when we feel love, when we feel kindness and compassion. Those are the standards, the virtues that we reach for in the unity movement, to try to understand that there's 5 basic principles, and that one presence and one power is the beginning of all of those, and that presence and power lives in each of us. Maybe we are not all that God is, but there is part of God in each of us. And when we come together, it's what Jesus said, whenever 2 or more of us are gathered, there I am in the midst of them. And there are a lot of sayings like that you can translate in order to understand it. But getting back to the unity movement, we connect deeper with this presence and this power through prayer and meditation. And we have different ways that we can teach the concept of prayer as calling something forward rather than begging God to give us something we don't have, coming from a place of abundance rather than a place of lack, and that we can not only have this knowledge, but that we practice this knowledge. Knowledge is not enough. We have to put this into play. You can practice any sport all year long, every day for most of your life, but if you never go into the game, you'll never know how much that you can accomplish.
The word sin and sinners,
Mm.
is that brought up in Unity Church, or what does that mean to you, or how do you
Ah,
teach that to people?
yeah. Um, I can look at it in I can understand that some people see sin as a mistake or an error, and that could make sense. I also can see sin as a building block, a way not to do something, a, an opportunity to try again, to find a better way. And depending on how you see these things, we all make mistakes in life. I think none of us gets out of life unscathed by error or transgression or whatever you want to call it. But if we learn from our errors, if we learn from our mistakes, if indeed we learn from our sins, then we kind of transcend the karma that those things bring. That's an interesting concept, karma. I think that karma is something that we have to understand was designed to help us refine our spiritual nature, not to condemn us to a series of lifetimes where we have to perfect our being. So I guess the bottom line about sin is that yep, we make mistakes, get over it, don't wallow in it, move along, do something kind, and most of all, forgive yourself. When you forgive yourself, you can truly be forgiven.
Yeah, thank you. I think it originally meant, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Missing the mark, missing the target.
Missing the mark. Well, it was. Some say that it was an archery term, and when the archers would practice their craft, they would shoot at a target. But because the targets were so far away and the arrows were so difficult to see over a long distance, they had dug a trench where their associates, their handmen, would sit behind that trench and yell back to them whether they were a mark or a sin. Mark meant they hit the target, and sin meant they missed the target. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at it, I think.
Yeah, thank you. You brought up the 12-step movement, and there's a major similarity, at least I seen when I first walked into that Unity Church in Torrance, California, when I seen the 12 powers and the 12 steps. And I know you have done some stuff with that, connecting the two. How fascinating was that to see that universal truth? Because Emmett Fox had a huge, he was connected with Charles Fillmore, wasn't he? And didn't he know him? And I know in the 12-step movement, they really look up to Emmett Fox and Bill. One of the early AA members was the mother was a secretary for Bill Wilson. I mean, for Emmett Fox. So they would go listen to Emmett Fox speak. So there's a huge connection there.
Yeah. I think that you will find that if you are connected in any way to a recovery program of any kind, really, you'll find that the information that you receive in Unity not only agrees but embellishes those concepts of recovery. The 12 steps and the 12 powers that you alluded to earlier. I even have in my annals library a yoga 12 steps yoga poses, that the asanas of yoga are being portrayed into 12 steps. So I think that instead of saying this way is right and this way is wrong, let us take the knowledge that was laid out in the big book, where Bill said to his readers, let us see where the clergy are right rather than where they are wrong. And that's not to say that there's nothing that's wrong with the religions of today. There certainly could do better in many areas, but there's also an underlying truth that waits for us to discover. And it sits deep in the depths of who we are. And all we need to do to grasp that wisdom is to be still, to be quiet. It is said often that stillness is the presence of God. Silence is the language of God. And if we could be still and we could be quiet, we will find that our own intuition, our own Christ presence, Buddha nature, will well up from the depths of who we are and make manifest in our world if we'll just be quiet and still and patient. and it comes forward.
I love that. There was another mystic that said, and I'm not sure if it was Rumi or was it Miser Eckhart, but they said, stillness is a language of God. All else is a poor translation.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
You know, Emmett Fox talked about Christ and Buddha shared the same meaning. Those were just those words. It was beyond the words. It was the level of consciousness, which I thought it was pretty
Mm,
interesting. He shared the very similarities between the word Buddha and Christ. Um,
mm.
what does the word Christ mean? Because a lot of people may think, not even think about it or think that it's Jesus's last name. But what does Christ mean to
Well,
you?
I can only tell you um, how I interpret that. I can only tell you that for me, um, Christ is not a Jewish or Hebrew word. It's more of a Latin word, and it comes from Christus, which is an anointing. When you reach a level of consciousness, when that presence of and power that lives within you comes forward, um, you are coming from your Christ consciousness. And it is very similar to the way they talk about um, the Buddha nature. It's that the highest level of who you are being portrayed in the world, being experienced in the world. So Christ for me is the is what we aspire to when we engage in spiritual practice. Um, it's not uh, Jesus's last name, um, but it certainly is um, just like Buddha is not um, Siddhartha's last name. Okay, it's a title. It's a an anointing. Same thing I think you'll find with other words that are out there, like the Atman, the highest level of human existence. I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say about that other than I hope we don't get wrapped up or too caught up in the words that we say, because the language is such a poor example of communication. I just wish that we could do a Vulcan mind meld when we're trying to talk to each other, and we could just know exactly what we wanted to express.
We were talking earlier about that scripture, that verse, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. And I mentioned to you
Yeah.
that that's been misunderstood down the ages, I feel, because Jesus said, by their fruits ye shall know them. And there's been a lot of
Mm-hmm.
discrimination and murder and hatred and division with the misunderstanding of that one particular verse. What's your
Mm.
intake on that verse?
Um, so I think if you break it down, there's three ways that we can look at things that come from scriptures of any kind. One of the things that we have to look at is that there are literal translations of concepts and ideas. And then there are translational concepts where not only are we reading just something that's literal, but we're going a little bit deeper and we're going into the when we can translate what does that really mean? The I am. What if Jesus were speaking from the I am presence of his nature rather than from his ego personality presence of I am? What maybe he was speaking from a deeper, more metaphysical process. And the third piece to that is transformational. How can I transform from where I was or where I began to where I am now? What makes not only the most sense or the most scientifically accurate, but what changes me? Those are the things that I'm very interested in. Transformation, evolution from a spiritual context. And I believe that Jesus spoke most of the time from those latter two. I don't think Jesus was worried about his personality one little bit. I don't think he wanted to be the savior of the world. I don't think he wanted to start a new religion. I don't think he was interested in getting fame or glory. But what he was interested in is raising the consciousness of humankind because of the environment of his day. People were being persecuted. People were being, um, punished for maybe things that were just a way of thinking. And Jesus was able to give the Hebrews of his day hope. Remember, Jesus was never a Christian. Not one day of his life. Christianity started after Jesus died, and Jesus was a Jew from the day he was born until this day we are in 2023. So to think that Christianity is the religion of Jesus is not so. Christianity is the religion of Paul, and Jesus' religion is something that sits much deeper into metaphysical value. When we talk about Parahansa Yogananda bringing the concept of Jesus to the world, he was talking definitely about more inclusive ideas, more metaphysical ideas, spirit moving in and through us. So did Emmett Fox. He spoke of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, and he talked about how Jesus spoke in the metaphysical translation, not in what we would call everyday speak. By the same token, Siddhartha did not come to start Buddhism. He was a Hindu from the day he was born till the day he died. And so we look at these things and we make a religion and we build statues and churches and spiritual places expecting people to start following a person instead of the idea that they bring forward, instead of the practices that they show us to get closer to our heavenly goal.
Yeah, thank you. I remember when I first met you, you were doing a book study on Eric Butterworth, one of his books. I think The Power Within You or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
within that book, it talked about the Beatitudes, and I
Yes.
love that. And that's very connected with Buddhism as well. I feel with the teachings of Buddhism, it's a universal truth, kind of like Dr. Bob, the co-founder of AA. He wrote he had his buddy write Through the Mind of Bob, the Akron pamphlets, and he breaks down all the universal truth of the world religions. I don't know if he touched on Hinduism, but he touched on Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. But he says the Four Noble. I mean, he talks about the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. You can easily replace it with the 12 from the. We can replace the 12 steps with the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. And he's not saying that Buddhism's the truth. He's saying it's the same principles. And if you think about the Four Noble Truths plus the Eightfold Path, 4 plus 8 equals 12. 12 powers,
There
12 steps.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, and as you probably know, a lot of the AA principles came as a result of the Oxford groups, which was more of a kind of a traditional look at Christianity. But that doesn't mean that there's not a wealth of spiritual information in all religious practices. The key, I think, that we might want us to look at or incorporate is their diversity. So if you feel this way, if you feel that Jesus is the only way, fine. That doesn't reflect with me. I might say, I'm glad that you have found a way that works for you. By the same token, I would look at this from a different angle and say, well, if Jesus is the only way, what happens to all those people who aren't exposed to Jesus? Or maybe there are all those people that might be Buddhist or Jewish or Hindu, right? Even the Muslims have a different interpretation, although they are a Brahmic religion, as is Judaism and Christianity. They all start back with Abraham. That doesn't mean that they see things the same way. So let us be more tolerant of each other. Let us be more compassionate and give people the opportunity to be right and the privilege of being wrong. Because it is only through our mistakes that we grow. We grow very little when we're in perfect harmony. We're just moving right along, and things are going good, and life is good, and we're smiling. But when things are difficult is really when we leap forward, when we really have to overcome an obstacle, whether it's emotional or mental or physical, and move into a new way of thinking about it that might adjust how we feel about something else in our lives. That brings me back to that idea of some things are just literal, some are translational, and others are transformational.
You know, there's a saying in the Gospel of Thomas, what you find what is within you, what you find will destroy. What you find what is within you, what you find will save you. If you do not find what is within you, what you do not find will destroy you. And I love that.
Wow. Yeah.
Speaking of metaphysical, the metaphysical point of view, like what does that mean, metaphysics? And because I know Unity Church I bought a smaller version and the big version that's in back of me right now, the Metaphysical Bible.
Oh, yeah. So, now keep in mind that Metaphysical Bible Dictionary is outdated. It was written a long time ago. And so some of those things that are in there today won't apply because they were designed for back in the turn of the century, last century. So updating things are really important. So as far as, how do we look at things metaphysically? Metaphysically, meta meaning beyond or behind, physical, the physics of things. So what is behind the physical? What is behind the physics of things? How do we see things differently? But the words might be the same, but two people might be seeing them or understanding those words from different points of view or different contexts. And so when we hear things like you brought up earlier, where Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was speaking metaphysically. He wasn't actually talking about the depth of his spirituality. Jesus was talking about the presence of his spiritual concept. His life was beyond the physical life. It was a spiritually enhanced projection of the God self that lived within. And therefore, he wasn't speaking as a personality. He wasn't speaking as an individual identity, but as the presence of consciousness. And so I am became the idea of whatever you put after I am is what you draw toward you. So very simply, when you say I am, metaphysically, what are you saying after that? I am not good enough. I am not strong enough. I am not fast enough, good looking enough. Whatever you want to put after the I am is what you're drawing to you. When Jesus said I am, he was talking about the divine within him. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one goes to the Father except by me. He wasn't talking about you have to go through Jesus. Jesus is the only path. In my opinion, he was talking about that concept of ideas that were spiritual in nature are part of his presence in the divine. And the way, the truth, and the life were his to discover for himself. And he was encouraging us to be that same kind of strength. The things that I have done, you too will do, and even greater than these will you do, according to Jesus. And that's where I think he was coming from. It's awfully hard to explain, but it's amazing to be able to experience.
Thank you. Yeah, he was speaking through the I within the I, and I love that.
The I within the I.
The true self. I like the Hindus, they write that capital S with self, and I love that. Because all is the self, God.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate you saying about it's outdated and being honest and truthful. Because I've had that problem in the 12-step movement I'm in right now. And I'm challenging to maybe do some updating, because the 12-step movement the big book was written in 1939. And there's some lingo that's outdated. There's some scientific stuff that's outdated, and maybe a new insights that we developed through our experience over the years, and so I've been getting a lot of heat for speaking up. It seems like you get in trouble when you speak up on stuff. And, a lot of times in the 12-step meetings, as you know, you have to go around the room and say, I am an alcoholic or I am an addict. And that's not who I really am. I don't want to put that stuff for me. I like to say I'm a grateful member of blah, 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 because I feel that's more healthier for me. But people get upset when you really think and be true to yourself. And that's just for me personally. I can't speak for anyone else, but that's healthier for me to say I am a grateful member of blah, blah, blah versus saying I am an alcoholic.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up, because there was a guy who he's no longer on this earthly plane, but he was part of my recovery back in Akron, Ohio. And he would say his name, first and last name, and said, I'm fully recovered. And he took that information from the big book that says we are over 100 men and women who are fully recovered from a seemingly hopeless condition. And he stood by that. So I think that if we look deeply at where the essence of recovery comes from, we might be able to find ways to help those who would not consider changing anything, to say, hey, maybe this is what Bill really meant, or maybe this is where the movement was at that time. So there's a good possibility that we can see things from a different lens.
Yeah, thank you.
I also don't think that that we should be saying the Lord's Prayer after a meeting.
I feel the same way. I feel the exact same way.
I think that although I'm very familiar with the Lord's Prayer, and said it thousands and thousands of times in my life, and don't think it's a bad thing at all, but it just excludes anybody who's not Christian from the I think the intention of the meeting. So I could take a little bit of slack for that, but I don't care. At this point in my life,
Yeah.
they can kick me out of their meeting if they want to.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody has.
I usually tell people maybe write your own prayer as a group conscience, and speak from your guys' heart and be creative, because that's the most beautiful thing about spirituality for me is authenticity and creativity, and be creative, speak from your heart, where it can be more inclusive. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. I've been to a meeting in Cincinnati where they created their own prayer. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Thanks. The spiritual seekers.
Yeah.
Say hello to them.
Yeah.
Watching.
Or use the seventh step or the
Serenity.
third step or the serenity, whatever. One of the meetings that I go to regularly often does the responsibility statement as their prayer. I think that's wonderful. I am responsible. Anyone, anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, very cool.
So how can we find you if someone's interested in your Wednesday night meeting? Is it Wednesday night?
It's actually, in Eastern time zone, it's 7 p.m.
Okay.
Here in the Pacific, it's 4 until there's the change. But it's Unity Awakening Ways. So that's all one word at gmail.com if you want to be invited to our Zoom session, and we will send you the link. So it's Unity Awakening Ways at gmail.com. And if you want to find us on our website, it's unityawakeningways.org.
Thank you. And I'll put it on my link below once I upload this episode. And any last words to the world?
Only that I admire the things that you're doing. I hope that your followers are many and plentiful. There's a big need for discussing spirituality in a more open, inviting, and informative way to let other people who would maybe not be so feel welcome. As you become more welcoming to others, I think that will draw more people to your type of broadcast and give people permission and an invitation to be part of their own spiritual recovery.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it was an honor to have you on.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Anytime.
Talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.